Hello there, welcome back to Nerd World Empire and more on the Romulan fleet here. We're going with the 22nd century Romulan bird of prey. If you watched my previous episode, I've already explained a little bit about this vessel. It is one of the first ships, in fact it is the first classification of vessel known to have been encountered by humanity in the 2152 when the Enterprise NX-01 inadvertently entered a Romulan minefield, and two of these vessels would disengage cloaking devices and order the vessel to leave their space. Before we get into the discussion on the lore of this starship, please like, share, subscribe, comment down below, and let's get into it. The Romulan bird of prey of the 22nd century was one of the mainstay vessels utilised by the Romulan Star Empire, and as I've stated in many videos recently, the lore on this ship is a bit thin on the ground. You'd think it wouldn't be, but that's because there's actually quite a lot of fan fiction out there about this ship. But if you really boil it down, Alpha Canon is just what we see, and what we see is what Starfleet knows. Starfleet only knows what it has seen. This ship has a green hull, general bird-like appearance, it is Romulan in origin, it is warp and impulse capable, which I'm going to get to a discussion on that subject in a minute. It appears to be armed exclusively with disruptors. It also has deflector shields. Now, there was likely more than two of these vessels guarding the system that the Enterprise stumbled into, as the Romulans would be unlikely to give away their true numbers in a first contact situation. It may also have explained why the Romulans chose not to engage visual communications, as they wanted to learn as much about the alien ship as possible without giving away too much about themselves. That's very, very Romulan, very Romulan of them. They may also have detected a Vulcan life sign aboard the ship and not wanted to reveal their presence. We generally don't know much about the vessels, although we know they are theoretically warp capable. I should rephrase that. They didn't offer any pursuit of the Enterprise, although they appear to have warp nacelles. We never see them engage their warp drives. It's reasonable they had warp drive, because they also appear to have smaller impulse engines on the rear of the ship. Now, the thing that, I don't know about you, I get stuck on with this ship is the obvious thing, the cloaking device. Kirk didn't recognize a cloaking device when they encountered the bird of prey 100 years later. Why then were the Romulans seen to use it? They must have been utilizing the technology during the war, and the mines were using cloaks. Now, cloaking devices were definitely not new technology to the Federation in the 23rd century, but why was it such a shock the Romulans had it? It is a continuity issue, and if you try really hard you can squint and come up with a few explanations. The most rational and easiest is that this was not a true cloaking device. It may have seemed like one, but we can note that the Enterprise was able to penetrate it using the sensor technology they used to penetrate Suliban cloaks. Now, this was future tech, but all the same, I think it's reasonable that this was some kind of inferior version and less efficient than the one that the bird of prey would utilize 100 years later. Now, that bird of prey had no warp propulsion system because of the power demands of said cloaking device. Now, if this ship 100 years previously was utilizing a cloak and also had a warp drive, that means one of two things. Either the Romulans actually selectively chose not to put a warp drive on the 23rd century version for whatever reason, or two, this is a less advanced cloak that requires less power and therefore is not as efficient, but also allows the vessel to retain its warp capability. It's also entirely plausible that during the Earth-Romulan War, Starfleet, or humanity at large in general, figured out how to penetrate and neutralize the Romulan cloak. It's possible they utilized the technology the Enterprise had, which they got from the future to see through Suliban cloaks, and they simply installed that on every ship in the fleet, made it standard. The Romulans never managed to counter it, and the Romulans, perhaps as a result of that conflict and that obvious change, simply abandoned using the cloaking technology altogether for about 100 years until they managed to advance it and start using it again. That's possible, and as a result it might have just gone out of living memory, and Kirk, not used to Romulan vessels using cloaking devices, wasn't familiar with it. That's one option. I'm sure people can think of better ones than what I just came up with. Put it in the comments below if you can, because it is a continuity error which Enterprise is often accused of. The Romulans, bottom line, they just shouldn't have had cloaking devices in the 22nd century, but it's canon now, so we got to explain it somehow. Back to again the ship itself. It seems perceptually to be roughly the same size as an NX class starship. Seeing that Romulan tech has to be on a par at least with Starfleet technology, and my guess would be at this time maybe a little more advanced. Their ships, they may have a tech that more closely rivaled that of the Vulcans, as we saw with their warbirds not long later. They could easily engage larger, more powerful vessels with ease. They certainly had the technology, at the very least, to be equal to that being fielded by Starfleet, the Andorians, or the Vulcans. And even if it was a bit more advanced, it wasn't so much more advanced that Starfleet couldn't challenge them, because if that was the case, then they wouldn't have won the war that was coming. We don't know how many of these ships the Romulans had, so again, we'll do a quick breakdown. The Romulans will have likely used these ships during the Earth-Romulan War, where we would have learnt more about them, but as we don't have much in the way of canon on that war, aside from knowing when it took place and that Starfleet won at the Battle of Charon, we know next to nothing about that war. So we can assume they had more, we can assume they used them. We can also make some other suppositions, intelligent guesses. The cloaking device creates a problem. If the ship had warp, maybe the warp was less sophisticated as another excuse, so it didn't have the range or projection, which might have been why they relied on minefields and other things to augment the defences, because the ships weren't particularly very fast, whereas you had those smaller warbirds that were quick, nimble, and able to get around. And these vessels are more the defensive ships, so although they would go on to be the Titans of the Romulan Navy in the future, right now, that was perhaps what they weren't. Now we can also assume the Romulans did have photon torpedo technology. These ships simply didn't carry it. It is out of universe. In the original script, the vessels were meant, it was noted as being firing torpedoes, but when they did the special effects, they're disruptors. So take from that what you will. I personally think they probably did have torpedoes, but it would be only my personal interpretation. These birds of prey, I bet they couldn't keep pace with Enterprise, which is another reason they didn't probably want to keep pursuit, and they were stationed to defend where they were. And yeah, other than that, next to nothing. We literally know almost nothing. Green hull, general bird-like appearance, armor disruptors, had shields, had a cloaking device, warp impulse capable. We know near nothing else. We don't even know if the Romulans had transporter technology. That's how little we know. But I think that works for the Romulans, because I think if we knew too much about them, it takes the mystery away from the Romulans. And I think having an evocative enemy like that for humanity and for the Federation, it adds a layer of dimension. Plus it allows for extra storytelling and allows you to add things and create things and change things more readily and easily to suit the current narrative and to invent new enemies and things like that. It does make for a more compelling villain, because sometimes the less you know, the better, because it does make them more ominous. If Starfleet simply understood them and knew them, then they wouldn't be as dangerous. Starfleet would know how to counter them better. But the bird of prey was only encountered at this point, up to this point, was likely encountered again during the Earth-Romulan War. But again, what we know, I've just said, it's all there. So with all that out of the way, if you know anything else about the bird of prey, or if you think I've missed anything, share it in the comments below. And if I see the comments, we can have a discussion about it. And remember, it'll be alright, soon be Christmas. I just want to take this moment to thank you for watching that video. If you liked what you saw, please check out my social links in the description box below to Instagram and Twitter and others. And also is down there a link to my Patreon page where you can support this channel and the others as I try to grow this franchise and do this more regularly. If you made it all the way to the end of this video, thank you for watching, and bye bye.